What's good, everybody? I'm Nick with No Cap Sports, and today we're diving into the NFL draft, man. As we all know, the best NFL teams are built through the draft, and no team is a better example of that than the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. If you look at their roster, 12 of their 22 starters were drafted after their 2018 Super Bowl win. So you can see how that foundation was built on the offensive side of the ball with guys like Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith, Cam Jurgens, and on the defensive side of the ball, all you got to do is say the word SEC, thinking about Nakobe Dean, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis. And then they added the two rookies on top this year, and Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell. So the Eagles were able to build their team through the draft, obviously supplemented with a guy like Saquon. But the foundation of your team is built through the draft. So today, we're going to get into the good, the bad, the ugly. And we're just going to talk about this NFL draft and the impact it'll have on this upcoming NFL season. Now, of course, you can't talk football without talking about quarterbacks. And yet again, as it seems like it is always the case during NFL draft time, the quarterbacks were the storyline of the night.
I think it's disgusting. I don't understand what the heck's going on with this. Fifth player on my board. It's never happened before in 47 years where a player that high has dropped this far into the fourth round at quarterback.
Before we dive into this year's quarterback class, let's take a look back at Bleacher Report's April 2024 mock draft and see how these quarterbacks stacked, and then we'll take a look at what actually happened this year. Bleacher Report's mock draft last year had 4 quarterbacks mocked in the first round, with Shadur being the first at pick 3, followed by Carson Beck. Obviously, he didn't enter the draft this year, Jalen Milroe, and Quinn Ewers. Now, obviously, as we all know, with the number 1 pick, the Titans selected Cam Ward, and we all knew that was going to be the case ever since the Titans locked up the number 1 pick by being the sorriest team in the league last season. We saw how the Will Levis experiment went, the Malik Willis experiment before that, and obviously the Titans have a big glaring hole at quarterback, and they believe they found their guy in Cam Ward, and I tip my hat to them, and I wish him nothing but success with Brian Callahan. With Cam Ward going number 1 and another quarterback not being taken until pick 24, there were obviously some guys who expected to get their names called early on that didn't. And obviously I'm talking about Shadur Sanders. A number of mock drafts had him mocked at that pick 2-3 range, either going to Cleveland or New York. And ultimately, we didn't see that happen, and we saw the so-called quarterback slide. Now, I want to just take a second, put a pin right there, and talk about quarterback slide. I think we need to reframe the way we talk about the draft, especially when it comes to a player sliding. Because when you think about it, when you look at these mock drafts, when you look at all these draft rankings, these aren't the actual teams putting these together. These are people in the media. You know, obviously they have their insiders, their insight, things like that. But a mock draft and actual perception of guys are two totally different things. And in Shadur's case, we kind of saw this start to bubble. The closer we got to the draft, we saw reports come out of some teams have Jackson Dart ranked higher than Shadur Sanders. Some teams like Tyler Shuck. Even though all of this information was coming in, we continually saw Shadur get mocked between those 2 and 3 spots, but obviously not falling past 9 where the Saints were picking. While, yes, he might have slid in a media sense, in an NFL sense, we never know what their true read, what their true perception of a player is. So if the league saw Shadur as a 4th, 5th round pick from the beginning of the process, did he really slide? And the reason I make that point about a slide is because I feel like once a slide happens, the media does its best to decide why that slide happened. And in the case of Shadur, we see it in a sense of they're pointing to his interviews, pointing to Deion being his dad, pointing to everything except what he put on tape on the field. And if you ask me, Shadur was my 2nd-ranked quarterback. I don't think he should have fell that far. But obviously, like I said, these NFL teams see things differently, see what they like, what they don't like, et cetera, et cetera. We saw what he was able to do this past season at Colorado, really these past 2 seasons, bringing a program to relevancy that it hasn't had since it went to the Pac-12 championship game years ago with Steven Montez as quarterback. That's real ball knowledge, by the way. So when talking about Shadur's production in college, all the things he accomplished across his tenure at Jackson State, his tenure at Colorado, but for the media to look at this slide and say, oh, it's because of his interviews, oh, it's because of his dad, oh, it's because of all of these things, to me, it's just asinine. The draft is about in my opinion, the NFL is a merit-based business. The draft is about what have you done, what have you produced, and obviously there are character things that go into it. But for a guy like Shedeur, who I had second in my quarterback rankings, for him to fall all the way to the 5th round was a big head scratcher to me. And that goes along with some of the other quarterbacks in this draft. You look at a guy like Quinn Ewers, who I said was mocked in the 1st round by Bleacher Report in their 2024 mock draft that came out in April. He fell all the way to the 7th round, pick 231. The last quarterback taken. Quinn Ewers had to see guys like Cam Miller, North Dakota State, Graham Mertz. Let me say that name again. Graham Mertz and Riley Leonard taken before him. To me, I just think sometimes when we get to the drafts, GMs overcomplicate things. For example, Quinn Ewers, a guy who was number 1 coming out of high school. I know that doesn't matter now. But his first season in the SEC, second team All-SEC, leads this Texas program to the college football playoff, plays some damn good football while injured, I might add. Falls all the way to the 7th round, and I think NFL GMs need to take a step back and look at what we're doing when we're evaluating these quarterbacks. A lot of times the words traits and potential get thrown around. But to me, like I said, the biggest thing is production. Shedeur, Quinn, all guys that produced at the highest level. So to me, to see those guys slide in particular was particularly dumbfounding, bro. So, of course, it wouldn't be right if I didn't start this video with the biggest winner, by far, my New England Patriots, man.
It won.
And everything starts with that first pick, number 4 overall, Will Campbell. You turn on the Patriots tape last season and one thing stands out. The quarterback was getting up off the ground a lot. Patriots were 2nd worst in the league in pass block win rate with a win rate of 51%, bro. That means every other snap, somebody getting beat and is beeline into the quarterback. That's not good for your foundation. That's not good, especially with a young quarterback. So with our number 4 overall pick, we addressed our biggest concern, our biggest need by taking Will Campbell to be that backside protector for Drake May. And if you heard what he said after getting drafted, you can't help but get excited, bro.
I'm going to fight and die to protect them with everything I got.
Now, obviously, there was some concerns leading up to the draft about his arm length and things like that. But this is a guy who played 4 years of SEC football, blocking some of the best pass rushers, some of the best edge players in the entire nation. And he was still damn successful. So I have no reason to believe that that same success won't transfer over to the league. So to me, I love the pick for the Patriots. That's the perfect way to start off the draft. But not only did they start it out perfect, they kept that momentum going. If you're a Patriots fan like me, you are subjugated to the torture of watching Jacoby Brissett football. And that resulted in the Patriots being bottom of the league, literally 32 out of 32 in explosive plays since 2022. We're the only team in the NFL with an explosive pass play percentage under 10%. Thank you, Jacoby Brissett. So with this in mind, the Patriots went and got 2 real deal home run hitters in Travion Henderson and Kyle Williams. Talking about Travion, we all know what he brings to the table as a change of pace back. He's always been in a stable with those Ohio State guys. This year he shared a backfield with Judkins. The year before it was Teague and some other guys. But regardless, this guy who put up 1,000 yards sharing the backfield this past season, 7.1 yards per carry, and 21% of his carries went for over 10 yards. Now, obviously, that's the kind of production you want from a running back. And I will warn, he had some games where he simply didn't get those explosive runs. But to have a guy in your backfield who you're capable of just turning around, handing the ball, and getting you a free 10, I cannot understate how much that will do for Drake May and this offense as a whole. And then you add on top of that his threat as a receiver, 27 receptions, 284 yards this past season. All you got to do is cut on that Oregon game, and you will see just how good Travion Henderson can be. And then as the cherry on top, obviously we already have Ramondre Stevenson as our lead back in the backfield. But we know Ramondre struggled with some fumbles last year. Travion, on the other hand, a guy who hasn't fumbled since his freshman year at Ohio State. So I love that pick. And then moving on to Kyle Williams, we add another dynamic receiver to grow with Drake May. Hopefully, this is a guy who was 4th in the FBS with 14 touchdowns last year. 8th with right at 1,200 yards. And he averaged 17 yards per reception. Now, if y'all remember what I said earlier, an explosive pass play is 15 plus yards. Patriots were dead last in that. We had a guy who averages an explosive pass play every time he receives the ball. If that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will, man. I'm looking forward to these new offensive weapons. Ford Drake made a play with No Diddy. In addition to Stephon Diggs and some of the other moves we made this offseason, I can see this Patriots offense really taking a big step this upcoming season. You bring Josh McDaniels in, a guy who just has success being the New England Patriots offensive coordinator. I don't know what it is. He can't find that success anywhere else, but in New England, he has it. So you give him Drake, man. You give him all of these other weapons. I can see a substantial improvement coming to this Patriots offense. I think the sky is the ceiling for this group, man, and I'm excited to see how it looks once they take the field in September. And on top of being dead last in the league in explosive plays, Patriots were also dead last in getting to opposing quarterbacks last year, ranked bottom in the league in sacks with only 28. He played 17 games, 28 sacks. With that in mind, the Patriots obviously had that as a big need going into the draft. Drafting Josh Farmer in the 4th round and drafting Braden Swinson in the 5th round. These are two guys who I can see coming in and making an immediate impact to that stable of rushers that the Patriots have. Joshua Farmer is a DT, had 9 sacks, 15 tackles for loss in his last 2 seasons. Just getting a guy to be in the middle and eat up space so that our edge where you can go to work. We saw Keon White start to get going last year and some other guys. So adding that guy in the middle is a big need for the Patriots. And I think Josh Farmer has the size and ability to be able to do that. And then you combine that with bringing in Braden Swinson off the edge, a guy who was 2nd team all SEC last year, 13 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, 3 PDUs last year. This is a guy who's a true disruptor off the edge. And if you saw his post-draft video, he's going to bring the juice to New England, and that's exactly what we need.
Patriots no ball. That's all I know. Patriots no ball. Watch this.
So I'm going to go on and stake my claim now. It might be a shocker. I might not put it on FanDuel. I might not. Shamelessly asking for a sponsor. But I like the Patriots to win the AFC East next season. Obviously, we know the Bills, the big dogs. The Jets going to be the Jets and the Dolphins going to be the Dolphins. But if you look at what the Patriots have done, not only in this draft, but in this offseason as a whole, with new leadership and Mike Vrabel, I have no choice but to be confident in how the Patriots will come out next season. And at the end of it, when the Patriots do win the AFC East, this is all I got to say. Obviously, we talked about the quarterbacks to open it up, and one of the reasons why the Saints are one of my biggest losers in this draft is that reason exactly. Drafting Tyler Shuck at 40 was one of the nastiest picks of the whole draft, in my opinion. Assuming that Shuck isn't established as the Saints' full-time starter this year, he'll be 27 at the start of next season. Do you really want a guy to become a full-time starter in his age 27 season? Especially with the fact that that second contract will come in his age 30, 31 season? Hell no. So that's my biggest issue with the Saints taking Shuck at 40, is it doesn't help them in the long term in terms of finding a franchise guy. And in my opinion, there's not even a guarantee that he beats out a Spencer Rattler, a Jake Haener in camp for that starting job, which is why I said he might not become the full-time starter until the following season. There's no guarantee the Saints are going to be good. And if they're not good, they're going to be drafting early in a very loaded 2026 quarterback class. So if the Saints have a high pick next year, you think they're not going to take another quarterback? Especially in the first round with a name like Arch Manning floating around, considering the Saints haven't drafted a first-round QB since his granddad and Archie Manning? And beyond that, you draft Shuck at 40, but what have you done to ensure he is successful, or anybody who takes snaps behind center in New Orleans is successful? Outside of Devin Neal in the 6th round and Moliki in the 7th, the Saints added 0 offensive skill players to a roster simply devoid of them. Olave and Shaheed ended the season on IR. They brought in Brandon Cooks, re-signed Jawan Johnson this offseason, but in a relatively deep skill player draft, especially receiver and running back wise, The Saints didn't make a move on any of those guys. And to me, this boils back to that them taking Shuck at 40. They definitely could have had a premium guy. When they took Shuck at 40, guys like Trey Harris, Kyle Williams, Harold Fannin Jr., Jack Beck, guys who can be reliable weapons on the offensive side of the ball, were still available when they took Shuck. And instead, they took Shuck and gave him no weapons. So we'll see how he does. But I was not a big fan of that pick. Not setting your rookie quarterback or really any quarterback in your locker room up for success is one of the main reasons why I have the Saints as losers of this year's NFL draft. Now, yes, the pick of Kelvin Banks with their number 9 overall pick was decent. I say it's decent. However, when talking about drafting Kelvin Banks, we got to look at the history of the Saints when it comes to the draft. This is the 3rd consecutive draft the Saints have spent a premium pick on an offensive tackle. You look at last season, they drafted Fuaga from Oregon State, bumped him out to left tackle. Year before, they drafted Trevor Penning out of Northwestern and slated him at right tackle. The Penning experiment hasn't been good. So to me, I feel like this was a reach to say, hey, we're going to take as many shots as we can at finding a franchise tackle until we hit it. And to me, that's a terrible draft strategy. Another big winner from this year's NFL draft, the Houston Cyclone receiving room, man. Last year, the Texans drafted Xavier Hutchinson in the 6th round of the draft, a guy who went for nearly 3,000 yards in his 3 years at ISU. And he's coming off his best year as a pro, primarily due to some of the receiver injuries that Houston faced. So you know what the Texans said? Let's go get some of your buddies from Iowa State, man. And this year, they drafted 2 Iowa State receivers in Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. Now, they drafted Jaden Higgins at 34 overall, a guy who is the 3rd team AP All-American and 10th in the FBS in receptions and receiving yards with 87 receptions, 1,183 receiving yards. And then they drafted his counterpart, Jalen Noel, at 79 overall, a guy who was 9th in FBS with 1,194 yards and who was 1st team as a return man. By bringing these 2 Iowa State receivers in, the Texans gave C.J. Stroud 2 more dynamic options to feed the ball, especially considering the fact that Tank Dell will be out for the majority of this upcoming season. So in Jaden Higgins, you get a bigger body guy, 6'4", 214, a guy who has a big wingspan at 6'7", and can eat up space and play with physicality, man. And then on the other side, you got Noel, a shiftier speed guy, 5'10", 194. Like I said, he was a 1st team return man, bro. So obviously you know that he has the quickness and elusiveness to make more happen after the catch. And then he's also a dynamic route runner. And he's just dynamic with the ball in his hands. So I think bringing these 2 guys in addition to drafting Xavier Hutchinson last year, is a big dub for the Texans because it just seems like guys can't stay healthy down there. And you can never have too many pass catchers, especially when they're as good and as talented as Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. Winner, 1st round trades. The first trade we saw the Jags trade for the number 2 overall pick, Travis Hunter, obviously. In addition to that, they received the 104th overall pick, which they used to take Baisal Toon from Virginia Tech. And then they used the 200th overall pick they received in that trade to take Rayon Lane, a safety from Navy. And on the flip side, the Browns got the number 5 overall pick, Mason Graham, the number 36 overall pick, Quinshon Judkins, the number 126 overall pick, Dylan Sampson, and a 2026 first round pick next year. Now for the Browns, I think this trade was a big win. Not only do they add more capital, which they desperately needed after the Deshaun Watson trade, I think they still made the same draft decision from a philosophy standpoint as they would have if they stayed at 2. Because I think if they stayed at 2, I think the pick for the Browns would have been Abdul Carter, somebody to pair with Myles Garrett and create a dominant edge rush. But by trading back to 5, instead they take Mason Graham, a guy who can truly fill the middle of that defense and be not only a pass stopper, but also a disruptor from the middle of the pocket. Any quarterback you know hates pressure up the middle, and that's exactly what Mason Graham brings. Mason Graham is a guy who was a 1st team AP All-American, 45 tackles, 7 TFLs, 3.5 sacks last season. And like I said, philosophically, it accomplishes the same thing that you hope to accomplish in potentially drafting Abdul Carter to pair with Myles Garrett. By adding Mason Graham, not only do you have a player who can be a run stopper, which is necessary in the physical AFC North, but you also have a guy who can be a true disruptor on the inside, who can create some more advantageous matchups for Myles Garrett, especially when you think about the fact they drafted Mike Hall from Ohio State in the 2024 draft. Having those two guys on the inside gives you a lot of flexibility and versatility in how you deploy them, the twists, the stunts, and then also just creating that one-on-one for a guy like Myles Garrett. And then for the Jags, I think this was a move that says, hey, Trevor, we believe in you and we're going to give you everything you need to be successful. So by taking Travis Hunter at 2, you pair him with Brian Thomas Jr., a guy who was top 5 in the league in receiving last year as a rookie. For the Jags, I think this trade was a win as well for them. Obviously, they paid Trevor Lawrence last offseason, and so now it's time to see some return on investment in terms of wins and making this team truly competitive. So while, yes, they gave up a number of picks, including a first rounder next year, they essentially filled 2 holes on their roster with 1 pick. And for that, I got to give them a dub for that, especially if Trav is the guy we all expect him to be. But I will say, if Trav is everything we expect him to be in terms of being that generational talent, even if Abdul Carter is that generational talent as well, the Browns might have some regrets, but I don't think it'll be the first time they've dealt with that. The other first-round trade we saw the Giants trade back into the first round for pick number 25 to draft, hopefully, their quarterback of the future in Jackson Dart. First of all, let's talk about the trade because, to me, flawless work. To get the number 25 pick, Jackson Dart, the Giants traded away their second-round pick, number 34 overall, number 99 overall, and a 2026 third-round pick. So the Giants got a first-round pick without giving up a first-round pick. To me, that is beautiful and great work by that whole Giants front office to do that, especially if Jackson Dart becomes their franchise guy. Looking at the Giants, I think Jackson Dart has a very good chance of becoming that guy. You look at what he did in college. He led FBS last season with 10.8 yards per attempt, was third in passing yards with almost 4,300, and completed nearly 70% of his passes en route to throwing a 52-11 ratio over the past 2 seasons. And you look at this Giants' current situation, they have guys like Russ and Jameis so that Jackson can sit and learn. If you watched his QB camp with John Gruden, he didn't do a whole lot at the line at Ole Miss. So giving him some time to learn the nuances of playing NFL quarterback will do numbers for his development. And then when you take it a step further and you look at some of the weapons that this New York offense has, looking at guys like Neighbors, Hyatt, Slayton, you would start to scratch your head as to why the Giants were 30th in yards per reception last year with 8.8 yards per catch. The Giants have a number of explosive playmakers, not only vertically, but also in a yak perspective. So adding a guy like Dart might be able to unlock what this Giants offense has truly been unable to do in terms of vertical passing game. So you look at the Giants first round overall, you get a guy in Abdul Carter at number 3, who in my opinion is a can't miss pick, a guy who will slide in next to Brian Burns and cause hell on the entire NFC East. And then you get back into the first round to get Jackson Dart, who I think has a very good chance to be the quarterback of the future in New York. I have no choice but to give the Giants an A+ for just the first round, man. And that can carry over to the whole draft because the Giants simply did what they had to do in this draft. And hopefully their infrastructure stays in place in the sense of keeping Brian Daboll. Joe Shane, I'm not as, hot about. But you keep a guy like Brian Daboll, let Jackson Dart learn and develop under him. And I think looking back on this draft in a couple of years, the Giants will see their entire franchise start to turn around because of the decisions they made in this draft. Loser, Cincinnati Bengals. While the draft is important for every NFL team, it's even more important for the Bengals this season, especially considering the financial commitments they've made to the trio of Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase. And the Bengals did a horrible job of responding to that pressure with their first-round pick of Shamar Stewart at pick 17. Like I said earlier when talking about the quarterbacks, I'm a big guy on production. What did you do? And simply put, Shamar Stewart ain't do jack shit. Yes, he's an athletic freak. Yes, he had insane testing numbers, but this is a guy that had 1.5 sacks last year, 3 sacks total over his past 2 seasons. And he had 1.5 sacks despite playing for Mike Elko, a guy who loves to send pressure, loves to create pressure. So while that might be an L for the Bengals in taking him, ultimately it's a dub for Trey Hendrickson because I'm sure he's laughing all the way to the bank right now when the Bengals realize what they have done. And then to make matters worse, they doubled down on drafting for immediate need by, in my opinion, reaching for Demetrius Knight Jr. in the second round with Jermaine Pratt asking out. So while I love the Bengals' defensive-oriented approach to this draft, obviously because of the struggles they had on that unit last year, I don't know if this draft actually helps that defense move in the right direction, especially considering the lack of production from some of the guys that the Bengals drafted and just their overall reaches. And now to wrap this up, man, our last winner is simply put, the usual. The guys picking in the back end, the best franchises in the NFL. Starting with the Ravens, Malachi Starks just falls in their lap. The perfect safety to pair with Kyle Hamilton, who took on more of a box role last year. And then you add on top of that, they get Mike Green, just the guy who led FBS in sacks last year, in the second round. So for me, great draft for the Ravens. Same can be said for the Chiefs, who I don't know what kind of witchcraft they did, but exactly what they needed, they got with the very last pick of the first round, and offensive tackle Josh Simmons. And then talking about Josh Simmons, to let y'all know how good of a prospect he is, his biggest concern is his health. Has the speed, hands, and leverage to do everything necessary to protect Pat Mahomes' backside. And what do you know? The Chiefs got him, man. On top of that, the Chiefs added a player that I think everybody should keep their eyes on just because of the Chiefs' track record and because of the player himself. The Chiefs drafted corner Noah Williams with a third-round pick, a guy who was a second-team AP All-American, first-team All-ACC, and finished third in the FBS with 7 interceptions and 16 passes defended. To speak to the Chiefs' track record, they've had a lot of success with these long, rangy corners. You think about guys like Charvarius Ward, L'Jarius Sneed, guys who have gone on to get big money contracts elsewhere. I think Williams could be in line for a similar role because when you think about the versatility that the Chiefs now have in their secondary with guys like Trey McDuffie, Christian Fulton, Jalen Watson, Brian Cook, Edwards Hicks, now you have the flexibility to say, hey, maybe we move Trent McDuffie back into being a nickel corner where he was a first-team All-Pro. I mean, he was a second-team All-Pro as a corner, but you get what I'm saying. Like, this gives the Chiefs so much flexibility if this pick works, and I have no choice but to think it has based on their track record. And lastly, the Super Bowl winning Eagles, man. They continue to find a way to win these drafts. They draft the consensus best linebacker with their 31st overall pick in Jahad Campbell. Obviously, we know Nakobe Dean had the patellar injury in the playoffs last year, so he's scheduled to miss some time. Jahad Campbell is a guy who can slide in and fill that role, a guy who was first-team All-SEC, 117 tackles, a guy who can literally do everything you need as a modern linebacker, talking about the ability to cover, the ability to rush, and simply the ability to tackle in space. So that's a great pick for them. It wouldn't be a Philadelphia Eagles draft if they didn't get a Georgia guy, and they got one in Smile Munden, a 3-down linebacker with the same skill set and ability similar to Jahad Campbell. And last but not least, Andrew Mukuba. Plus. I can't say how much I love this pick for the Eagles, especially with the departure of C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I think he is a very, very good player to add to that secondary, especially in that robber role, just a guy who brings physicality and who really fits the ethos of that Philadelphia Eagles defense. So like I said, the best teams have the best drafts, and that's how you build a sustainable organization. And we've seen that yet again. So, man, thank y'all for tuning in to my NFL draft breakdown. Make sure y'all follow us on our socials at NoCapSports. Also, make sure y'all follow me at nkh.thecreator. Make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see y'all in the next one. We out of here, man.